Hello guys, this is Kay and welcome to another episode of the Pod Rainbow Science, and in today's episode we're gonna talk about transgender people and Olympic Games 2020, or 2021 actually. Here we go. How are you doing, by the way? We just left Tokyo and said goodbye to another Olympic Games, and without a doubt the most strange Olympic Games I can remember, but also eyes-opening Olympic Games. Strange and weird because of the audience-less competition. I mean, it was sometimes like watching athletes doing their training routine, so I'm awed by the level of motivation they were able to maintain doing it. And eyes-opening because we had once again the refugee Olympic team, which we saw for the first time in Rio 2016, and now in Tokyo we had 29 athletes from, I believe, 11 different countries competing in 12 disciplines. We also had a pretty significant number of LGBTQ participants, and I guess someone counted that over 180 out and proud athletes took part in this year's Olympic Games, and they earned as many as 32, I believe, or 33 medals. No, I believe it was 32, but you can check it later. Of course, we had the one and only Tom Daley, the diver from the United Kingdom, who went absolutely viral kneeling in the stands while watching diving finals. There were all great moments we shared. We had a lot of fun and a lot of moments to be memorized and celebrated. However, I have to make a confession. I'm not the biggest fan of watching other people doing sport. I mean, in this case, I'm more of a doer, so I prefer going out and play tennis or swimming than watching it on TV. So, well, yeah, and by the way, I'm in Central Europe. I live in Poland, so the most important games were broadcasted somewhat between 2 and 5 a.m. And even though I do wake up early, I don't wake up that early, so I mostly watch the Eurosport shortcuts to see what's going on out there. However, there's one relevant issue I'd like to tackle in this episode, and that is transgender and gender non-binary persons in sport. And especially the seemingly cumbersome case of testosterone as a central issue, causing the whole cascade of other problems for transitioning transgender athletes or cisgender women with polycystic ovary syndrome, which may cause the more or less elevated level of typical male hormones. Before I review what is now the focus of the researcher, we have to go all the way back to 2009 to Berlin, Germany, where the world had the very first chance to spectate the phenomenal 800 meters run of Caster Semenya, who was back then a young girl from the Republic of South Africa, who just literally blew away her competition. However, there have been some concerns whether she does or does not meet the requirements to compete as a woman. And from then on, this poor girl from South Africa became the subject of gender verification process, or as I like to call it, an athlete humiliation process. And since most of the discussion about results of medical verification were presented to public, or at least to committees who were supposed to decide over her case, and if I were to think of one thing that was positive about this whole issue, I would say that this showed the audience how hard it is to determine someone's gender, and that when using the notion biological sex or the notion biological gender, you are never precise, so that you never know what this person is really talking about. But the battle between Caster Semenya and the international athlete committees and so on had many turnovers, including rejecting her from competition, requiring to suppress the level of testosterone, letting her back on track to participate, and so on. And after more than a decade, the case is still in process, and there is nowhere near to the end. And I don't want to go into detail about castrosomania case, so I'm going to just briefly explain what's the point. Well, the most common chromosomes composition we observe in human is XX and XY. Those are the most common forms of pairing of chromosomes. And these are 2 chromosomes. One is from the father and one we receive from the mother. And usually when we have the XX pair, the fetal development goes toward femininity. And when we have XY, we have a development toward being a male or a man, whatever. However, and it is very important in this case, even though the Y chromosome is present and we expect this Y part of this pair to start the cascade of male development, it is not certain that this is going to happen. Because sometimes the next steps of development are blocking the activity of Y chromosome, or to be more precise, the activity of SRY, which is sex-determining region of Y, and there is a gene on the Y chromosome which is blocked. Well, I encourage you to look it up because it's super interesting, but I don't want to brag about it for too long right now. But to sum it up, sometimes even if you have XY chromosome pair, it is not certain that you are a man, and that's it. You can look like woman, you can basically feel like woman, you can identify as woman and still have this XY pair. But let's go back to the Olympic gender mess. Well, if you think it was the first moment when testosterone and gender played havoc with Olympic Games, I'm sorry, guys, but you're not even close to the truth. And to see why is that, we have to go back even farther into the past and see what's been going on in 1970s and 1980s. It was pretty hard time for Europe in general concerning the Cold War and communism that overtook a significant part of Europe. But man, that was a great time for athletes from Eastern Europe. I mean, of course I'm kidding, but when you look at the best result of that times, people from Eastern Europe were just like superheroes. They were the best. And it was the time when almost everybody from this part of Europe was taking anabolic steroids, including testosterone. So it was just like COVID vaccines. You are an athlete, bang, this is your anabolic shot. And no discussion. You gotta have it. And as you are probably assuming, it increased the power of those athletes and speed up their regeneration, but it also, I guess very unsurprisingly, prompted the visible changes in bodies, such as lowering the pitch of voice and growing of body hair, and including facial hair and things like that. And because it is exactly how it works, you cannot take anabolic steroids and avoid these changes. And here's one thing that's gotta be highlighted and remember for the rest of your life. Changes caused by testosterone are usually, in the most cases, irreversible. So once your voice goes down in pitch, it will not go back to the normal level. So be careful with taking it on your own without the proper medication advice, because sometimes the changes are irreversible. And as we can imagine, taking high doses of testosterone, I don't know what was the exact dose they were given, so if you find information somewhere, just let me know. But anyway, increased the overall performance of those athletes. They were stronger, they were faster, they performed much better than those who were not on testosterone. And I found an interesting piece that's addressing this issue that is from Leon Foster and his team, and the paper is entitled Modeling Effects of Drug Testing Procedures on Performance Trends in Shotput. So, Shotput was the discipline they analyzed and was published in 2014. And they collected 25 top performance of Shotput from between 1891 and 2012. So the duration of 121 years in the case of men. And for women, the time was shorter by 30 years. It was from 1921 onwards. And what we saw was that both in the case of women and men, performances appeared to peak during 80s, but for women the peak was more visible and more steep. Whereas in the 90s, the top performance dropped a little, but dropped and later just leveled off. Well, the moment when the results started dropping was the exact moment when the anti-doping procedures became more prevalent and more commonly used. And of course, we can expect that top performances will be beaten over time due to better technology, better training routines, developing knowledge on physiology and human body, and so on. So, otherwise there's no point in waiting for the next world record or collecting Olympic record. But if you take a closer look at the graph, which are provided by Foster, in recent years, the line indicating top performance is almost flat as compared to the increase from 70s and 80s. So they wrapped up their paper with the following statement, and I will read it right now. And the statement is, oh god, where is it? Okay, here it is. Evidence presented here suggests that performances have declined on top of underlying global performance improvements since the introduction of anti-doping measures in the late 60s. Therefore, it seems likely that current athletic performances have been influenced to a lesser extent by doping than before drugs testing programs were introduced. So we got it clear. Doping improved the performance of both men and women, and when it ceased, the performance worsened and stabilized. And that's it. And I think we all can agree that it is not fair to take doping when you're an athlete. It's not okay to boost your performance with any artificial substances. So, no shortcuts. I attended sports school and I know that it's fucking hard to follow the workout routine. It is fucking hard to go for swimming training every day, and there are days when you just want to skip the training. Yes, we all know that. We've all been there. But you have to kick your own ass and do it. Just to push your own boundaries and know that you can. And that's it. Just as simple as it. But let's go back to the troubling transgender bodies. Well, sex classification in sport is based mostly on physical differences between men, or actually people assigned male at birth, and women. So a person's assigned female at birth. And when we compare circulating testosterone in men and women after puberty, men have roughly 15 times higher level of circulating testosterone. And the increase in circulating testosterone creates greater muscle mass, greater strength, greater bone density, and sometimes additionally behavioral differences. This, on average, gives men advantage when it comes to physical performance, and by saying on average, I mean there are, of course, women much stronger with greater endurance than many men, but we can infer from research and statistics that we can, because the research and statistics tell us what is going on average. So tells us that when we pick any man from the population and compare him with any woman from the population, that is more likely than that this man is gonna be stronger than a woman we picked. So that is basically how the research works. So it seems that sex-based segregation in sport is a way to prevent women from losing against men because of obvious hormone-related differences. And just to achieve a level playing field for everybody. That is the basic thing that underlies the sex-based segregation. However, there are at least a few alarming issues related to this approach. And first, serum testosterone level in healthy men between 18 and 40 years varies from 7.7 to 29.4 nanomoles per liter. So I'm going to repeat it once again. 7.7 to almost 30 nanomoles per liter. That is quite a huge range. And as for women of the same age, the level of serum testosterone varies from 0 to 1.7 nanomoles per liter. And according to the International Association of Athletic Federations and also International Olympic Committee, an athlete must maintain serum testosterone level below 10 nanomoles per liter for at least 12 months to be legally recognized as a woman. And one certain question popped up in my head when, like, why 10 nanomoles per liter? Who came up with this and where did they get it from? And, they thought it was the lowest level of serum testosterone for cisgender men. And someone just came up with this idea, other guys agreed, and they just simply nailed it down. And this is quite ridiculous because now the International Olympic Committee's medical and science director, Dr. Let me see his name, Dr. Richard Budgett, admitted that it is no longer backed by science. I mean, this 10 nanomoles per liter is no longer valid. The level of serum testosterone dropped to roughly 7, as we saw before, but, well, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Olympic Committee should pinpoint the level of testosterone to 7 now, or to 7.3 in 2 years, or to 7, I don't know, or to 6.2 in 5 years. What I'm saying is that testosterone level can change over time, and it is influenced by factors such as smoking, diet, body fat percentage, exposure to environmental toxins, physical activity level, and in women it is prone to oral contraceptive use and even menstrual cycle. And of course the influence of those factors is not tremendous, but still there are visible effects of each. So now when we know how much of the testosterone variation depends on the external factors, maybe right now is a good time to rethink whether it should be that threshold of sex segregation in professional sport. And another problem with the segregation based on testosterone is related to its level in particular gender groups. I mean, I told you before that serum testosterone level vary from person to person, and in men it ranges from 7.7 to 29.4. And therefore, my question is it fair for the men with, for instance, 11 nanomoles per liter to compete against the men with 28.5 nanomoles per liter in Shotput, for instance, which requires a lot of muscle mass and strength? And I don't know. I'm not going to give you the yes or no answer, but if I were looking at this problem from the testosterone-based standpoint, I'd have some serious misgivings. Really. Because 11 to 28 is quite a wide range. So I think the 11 nanomoles guy would just lose immediately against this 28.5. But I'm not giving you the answer. I'm leaving you with this one. So that's what we got about testosterone itself. So let's have a look at our beloved transgender sport bodies. Well, first of all, I have to tell you that this year Olympic Games had enormous number of gender and sexually diverse athletes. And I wouldn't even try to enumerate all of them. So I'm gonna just bring up probably the most famous right now, and you might have come across this name, Laurel Hubbard, who is a weightlifter from New Zealand and who is the first transgender athlete who participated in Olympic Games in the sex category according to her identity, not to her assigned gender. And even though she did not complete any of the free lifts, she already, she just couldn't pick up like 127 kilograms, I guess. I don't remember, but she didn't complete any of the free lifts, but she already made a history. And first, because despite of the obvious impact of testosterone she had during her lifetime, she did not manage to beat cisgender weightlifters. So I'm sorry, testosterone team, but hormones are not always the most important thing. At least it seems like that. And second, receiving such a huge amount of support and love from the audience, she paved the way for other transgender sports people. So after all, winning or losing was the least important thing in this case. But, well, first things first. In 2003, the International Olympic Committee addressed the issue of transgender athletes in sport by drawing up the new guidelines. And it was broadly known as the Stockholm Consensus and tried to, more or less successfully, fit the modern understanding of gender into the old-fashioned sex frameworks. That was basically it. In the case of transgender men, so just to remind, transgender men, so those whose assigned gender is female, but on the gender dimension they are closer to the men's side. They can participate in the men category without any restrictions. Thank you, Olympic Committee. We appreciate it. So no matter how long they transition so far, and no matter how far they want to go with their transition, they are eligible to compete as men without any problem. However, in the case of transgender women, things started to complicate a little. Transgender women can compete in the women category. However, there are 4 conditions that have to be fulfilled, and they are as follows. Let me take a look at my notes. First one, the athlete has declared that her gender identity is female, and the declaration cannot be changed for sporting purposes for a minimum of 4 years. Okay, so if you, out of your gullibility, believe that Olympic Committee noticed the presence of non-binary people, here I am to prove you wrong. They did not. You have to identify as female and that's it. Full stop. Second point, the athlete must demonstrate that her total testosterone level in serum has been below 10 nanomoles per liter for at least 12 months prior to her first competition. So that is something we already mentioned. Someone came up with the idea of 10, whereas now we know that an average level of serum testosterone is dropping year after year. And by the way, there's a very good paper on the average level of testosterone in men, and it was written by I believe Lakeshore and colleagues just like a year ago. I believe it was 2020 or maybe 2019, but never mind. I'm gonna upload the link in the description of the episode anyway. They compared the average level of testosterone in different time points among adolescents and young adults. And the interesting thing is that they showed that average level of testosterone is declining with time. So for instance, in year 2000, the average was 605. In 2004, it was 567. In 2016, it dropped to 451. And the differences were statistically significant. So this is a very interesting paper, you can have a look at this. But anyway, so you see that benchmark from 2003 is, to put in polite words, a little behind the times. And I know it must be a little inconvenient for transgender people, because it means that the acceptable level should be lower. But anyway, if we want things to be fair, we have to support anything on scientific issues. I mean, we have to decisions have to be made, have to be backed by science. It's like they cannot be just, taken from nowhere. But anyway, point number 3 from the Olympic Committee is The athlete's total testosterone level in serum must remain below 10 throughout the period of desired eligibility to compete in the female category. So that one is clear. You compete, you stay below 10. That's it. And finally, number 4. Compliance with these conditions may be monitored by testing. In the event of non-compliance, the athlete's eligibility for female competition will be suspended for 12 months. So, if you don't comply to bullet point number 3, so if you just go above 10, it doesn't matter if it's 14, 25 or 10.1, you're out of the female category and you must go back to the male category, where of course your chance of winning is somewhere around 0 because your serum testosterone is clearly very low as compared to other cisgender men. And these 4 bullet points from the International Olympic Committee guidelines on transgender athletes, they are on one hand, on one hand, some people might be happy that they at least exist, but on the other hand, we're in 2021, and society has changed. Sociology and social psychology provided enough evidence for the importance of inclusion in every area of human activity, and those guidelines are, first, over a decade old, and second, they are rather exclusionary and require people to complete the full transition process, while there are transgender persons who are not entirely interested in undergoing all the medical and all the hormone interventions. And if you want to read more about it, you can go over to a paper I wrote with my fellow colleagues on transition plans and among transgender and non-binary transgender people. There you can see the differences between people who are willing to transition completely and people who just want to, the partial transition. And I will also upload a link below. So, once I found myself reckoning, if I were a transgender person, would I be stubborn enough to participate in all these sport things instead of jack the hell in everything and go my way somewhere else? And if I were to answer right now, or in this moment when I'm not having the best time of my life, I would probably say I'd rather quit sport and I would engage in something else. But I also ask myself another question. Is there more pros than cons of being a transgender person in more or less hostile or at least unfriendly environment? And well, it seems there is at least a few significant advantages of such activity. First, even though on the institutional level there seems to be more barriers and obstacles than facilitations, on the team level and interpersonal level there are numerous positive aspects. And the one and most important highlighted by transgender people, in this case transgender men playing in women's softball team, they claimed that they were accepted just the way they are. And in some twisted way, they were well understood by cisgender women playing in that league. And of course, I imagine there would be a greater problem with men in cisgender man team, which seem to play in more aggressive and competitive way. But in the women's team, it's not a great problem. Also, transgender people indicated that there was an immediate reaction for their coming out, and although sometimes they experience misgendering, such as dead naming, and that naming is using their old names according the name which was according to their assigned gender. But they also claimed that other teammates reacted just like on the spot, and they corrected the transphobic person right away. And I know that there are countless additional troubles related to locker rooms and swimming pools, which are of course sex-based, and everyone is staring at each other, and it's not that comfortable when you wear a binder and people are gazing and so on and so on. But still, the support received from their teammates and being a part of the sports society, seems to at least to some degree alleviate the negative experience of transgender and non-binary persons. And additionally, contrary to the arguments that people assigned male at birth carry some advantages related to elevated level of testosterone, however, this argument was never brought up by the women from these teams. And I flipped through quite a few papers on sport teams and transgender regulations, as well as transgender people's experience in playing sports in college teams and other similar issues, such as, rejection in team sport or hostility in sport environment and so on. And I came across the argument, this argument about the advantages of testosterone. I came across it maybe once. I read really maybe once or twice that someone accused transgender woman that she was too big to compete with other women, or she was too strong, or whatever. Other negative experiences were mostly related to dead naming or general negative attitude toward transgender people. But it seems that this whole testosterone advantage problem, it doesn't strike as the greatest problem for women, for cisgender women. Just to wrap up quickly and sum up what we know so far, there are people who believe that testosterone is the basic issue for sex-based segregation in sport, and at some point it is reliable. However, there are secondary issues from the simple ones, such as uncertainty regarding the threshold of the testosterone, which should be set as the benchmark for gender segregation, to the softer one, such as developing and changing society and demand for greater acceptance toward gender diversity in sport. And I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm not going to tell you whether testosterone or any other hormone actually should be the bottom line for grouping professional athletes, but I'm just gonna leave you with the question if there are better ways to include every athlete and maintain a level playing field for everybody. Okay, so I guess that's all from me today. I'd love to hear what you think about it. I'd love to see your point of view, and if you like to share, please comment or send me a message. I will answer your mails with pleasure. And until next time, bye.